Hey everyone, Scott, Black Mountain Maple, and today we're going to be making a couple different styles of push sticks. The first thing I'm just doing is breaking down a little bit of stock, marking out. I've got a couple of these cheap little push sticks, just getting a bit of a layout off of. I'd like the overall design, but it just needs to be tweaked a little bit. They're starting to wear out as well, so we're going to switch, make some out of wood. So here I am just getting ready, using a bit of maple and some walnut. I like to rotate the grain on the handle, as you can see here, so that way it's actually a bit more vertical. It's just one thing with the way those push sticks work. If you use one piece of solid wood, I find that grain just seems a little bit fragile when it's supposed to be protecting your hand above the table saw blade. So this should prevent that from breaking. So I'm going to be just doing a little mortise and tenon joinery just to connect the handle to that bottom piece. So here I'm just laying out and cutting the actual mortise into that piece of maple. Just going around 1/4 inch. Not going for anything too big. I'm using epoxy to hold this in. Right here, I should have realized a little bit earlier, but you'll actually notice that as I'm pounding this in, trying to clear this out, that the chisel actually manages to get stuck. So I try to hammer it out and realize I'm actually separating the handle from the chisel. So I start to panic a little bit, knowing this isn't a very large chisel, and I really don't want to end up snapping that off. I think maybe a couple more taps, maybe not. Try and shock the wood a little bit. Let's see. End up actually just using the marking knife and trying to cut down into it and make it so that I can actually get that chisel back out. And decided after that we'll just stick with a bevel down motion with the chisel instead. Come in with the larger chisel, clean up the walls, mortise. And then start working on the tenon. And now that had a few little satisfying woodworking sounds in the close-up there of cutting that tenon. Use a bit of 5-minute epoxy to get this set in. The tenon was just a little bit looser than I would have liked. That'll fill some of the gaps and still give it a really good bond. Keep it nice and strong. It was a little bit of an ordeal trying to figure out how to clamp this with the 2 different angles, but while that epoxy's setting up, I'm going to trace out this other push stick that came with the table saw. I like the length of it and the overall style. It's just the angle seems a little bit wrong for me, so just going to make one of a piece of cherry I have here. It actually was a bit of the molding left over from my kitchen cabinets. So it's quite simple. Just lay it out and cut it out on the bandsaw. You can see I actually laid it out twice. I didn't realize when I flipped it over there was a little bit of a split in that piece of wood on the other side. Now it's cut out on the bandsaw. I cleaned up on bench sander. Just round it over, make it nice and smooth, and then we'll just round it all over with a router. Currently in the process of coming up with a router table, so for right now it's just the router clamped in my bench vise. I think this is just 1/4 inch round over bit, just going around the edges, and then I'll just finish it up with a little bit of sanding, and then that one will be done. So here, just tracing out that the overall shape of that other push stick again onto this walnut and maple piece. And then we can do something very similar, just cut it out on the bandsaw and do a little bit of a round over. So this was actually a couple days later that I got back to doing this one. So that epoxy had set up for a few days, but we had some very cold weather. We were with wind chill around minus 40 degrees Celsius throughout those couple days. So my shop got very cold as well. And I didn't realize actually that the epoxy had not set up and had frozen before, and apparently was no longer any good, as you can see here. So I figured I would just reuse the handle, get that cleaned up, and see just how goopy, I guess would be a word, or how not set that epoxy actually is, how soft it stayed after those few days, even though it was a 5-minute epoxy. Excuse me. I had to switch over to a couple cheaper chisels just because it's more just pushing that stuff off. It didn't cut, so I was trying to scrape it out. And I'll come back with the nicer chisels and just redo the shoulders and thin that tenon just a little bit, cleaned up. And we'll make a new base for that push stick. I'll speed it up a little bit. Same process again, using a piece of cherry this time instead of that piece of maple. Actually using an 1/8" chisel here from the Narex Richters. Not something I expected to use as much as I do, but I highly recommend if anybody's getting them to get the 1/8" as well. So now this tenon's just a little bit tighter, or the mortise is a little tighter on the tenon than what I had before. So I'm just going to cut a little notch out. And I'll actually end up using some wood glue on it this time, as opposed to trying with that epoxy again. And same process again as before, just cut it out on the bandsaw, then take it to the bench sander. Here we are with the wood glue, and again using Type Bond. I've got a wood fire going and a heater going in the shop this time as well, but with Type Bond 3 it has a little bit lower working temperature than some of the others, so that's why I like to use it this time of year in my shop. Where I am in Atlantic Canada, it does get pretty cold, so this just gives it a little bit extra benefit. So I don't keep the shop heated all the time, but usually if I'm doing a glue up, I'll leave the heat on for most of the day at least to let it really harden up. And then here I'm realizing the benefit of a spindle sander, switching to the Dremel for these inside curves. Just getting them nice and smooth and get something for the router bit to ride along. And back to the router in the vise. Put the same 1/4" round over this one. After this, just did a little bit of light sanding and called it done. Time to test it out. Just got this little scrap piece of cedar that I've had laying around for a little while. I've got a few of them, but just left over from some other project. Trying out the first one. There you go. 2 different styles of push sticks, and how I went about making them, the little differences that I do compared to other people. If you have any thoughts, please leave a comment down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.